Hello and welcome to the Congressional District 1 debate hosted by the KU Young Dems. My name is Amy Castle. I am the faculty advisor to the KU Young Dems. I am also a member of the Douglas County Democratic Committee. Thank you, KU Young Dems, for hosting this very, very important debate. I also want to thank the Douglas County Dems, and in particular Melinda Levon, who had to leave and be somewhere else, who helped make this event happen. So, LFK is now in CD1, right? Lawrence is in Congressional District number 1. And we have two excellent candidates running for CD1. We have Colin McRoberts and Reinhold. I want to thank both of you already for being here on this hot evening and answering our questions. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for attending tonight.
Thank you for having me up here. Amy, thank you for the introduction. Thank you both for being here today. I sincerely appreciate you making the drive. So to begin, we do have several questions today. For those interested in raising a question, Amy will be around with note cards, as she mentioned. Feel free to flag her if you wish. Yes, sorry. Mic might not be working. There we go. So, to begin with questions, we have one that is on quite a few people's minds presently. On February 28th, President Trump started a war of choice with Iran. In our name, Trump has killed thousands of Iranian civilians, including over 100 school children, which he bombed on the first day of the war using U.S. cruise missiles. Since then, 13 soldiers in our armed forces have died and hundreds have been wounded across the Middle East. In March, Tracy Mann voted against a bill that would limit Trump's war powers in Iran. If you were in Congress, in addition to hopefully voting in favor of limiting the president's war powers, how else would you use your power in Congress to try and stop this illegal war?
Or do you want us to stand up? Oh, okay. We do here. Okay. All right. I guess I'll go first on this one. Okay. Hearing me okay, everyone? All right. So, the actions taken in Iran are immoral, irresponsible. This is, as Amy said, a war of choice, and bombing civilians and threatening them constantly is unacceptable. We can't be doing that. This is a result of irresponsible leadership at the helm of the Department of Defense, and it's also a result of this president letting Israel order us to go to war. And unlike Mann, I would vote in Congress against these unjustified aggressions, including legislation that's specific to the current circumstance. And it's my understanding there's going to be another vote on a resolution later this week. So ultimately, we need updated legislation to clarify war powers. The War Powers Act is very outdated, and I support updating that. I also support repeal of the 2002 authorization for use of force law, and the War Powers Act, which currently covers ground troops. It's very limited, and it was enacted in 1973 in response to the Vietnam War. So it needs to be updated to require that the president also go to Congress for actions that are drones, all these air attacks, and covers all areas of warfare. So I fully support that. I think that's one of my team and I have talked about it, one of the best solutions we have is to limit this confusion that we have about who has the powers. And like I said, there's going to be a resolution Thursday seeking to limit, and from what I know about that resolution, there's not much detail out there right now. I would support that in Congress. We do not need unjustified, horrific wars that are attacking civilians and where there's not adequate planning and there's not an adequate exit strategy.
Thank you. The vote is on Thursday, and I think we all know how it's going to go. There is no chance that Tracy Mann or the Republican majority will stand up for what's right in this case. But that's why it's not good enough to simply say we shouldn't be doing that. If we had made those amendments a couple of years ago, the last time we had control over the House and the Senate, we would still be at war in Iran today, because we have a Republican Congress today, and they would vote to go to war if they were told to go to war. If we simply say we're going to rescind that authority, there's nothing that keeps it from coming back the second the Republicans take control of both houses again. So when we make those amendments, they must include a 2/3 vote to reauthorize the use of force. Without that, we are not going to be doing anything differently in future wars of choice. And bear in mind, this is the second war of choice in the last 12 months. If Iran had gone better, I think we'd likely be looking at 3 or maybe even 4 by the time of the election, because it's a convenient political strategy when the president has firm control of Congress, which is why, of course, he must take away that control of Congress. But there's another problem here, which is that if we simply go to Congress and we say, this isn't good, we shouldn't do it anymore, that's not going to bring the votes we need to make a really lasting change. We need to make a public record that we can show to the public to prove to them what the causes and the consequences of this kind of war of aggression really are. And that should be easy if we bring in the right votes. Because this is a war under a Secretary of Defense who was, I can't think of a more eloquent way to put this, a wet drunk when we gave him the keys to the most powerful military on the planet. I teach business law. I tell my students it is fine to hire someone who has a problem with alcohol as long as they are in recovery. You can give them the keys to the truck. You can give them the surgeon's scalpel, because it's okay for someone to redeem themselves and to change their life. But if they tell you they're going to stop drinking, which is what Pete Hegseth said when he was confirmed, I will stop drinking if you confirm me. You don't give the keys to someone who says, I will stop drinking if you live in your truck. I will stop drinking if you hire me as a surgeon. No. Hegseth was a terrible choice, and the things he has done as Secretary of Defense are indefensible. He has fired our generals for the sin of being black or being women. He has tried to make the military whiter and more obedient to the president instead of ethical and honorable things for our defensive services to do. If we create a public record of that, as Congress did on January 6th, it creates a shield against future pressure to corrupt our defensive forces, which makes it more difficult to launch these wars of choice. We have some hard work in front of us, but it's work that has to be done to make sure this isn't repeated.
All right, hopefully you can hear me this time. Both of you have traveled across Kansas extensively, so thank you for your efforts to do so and to connect with our voters in rural areas. In addition to talking to voters in Western Kansas, how are you making efforts to build coalitions and partnerships in future congressional campaigns? We'll start with you, Colin.
Thank you very much. You'll hear from both of us that we do a lot of traveling across Western Kansas. Lauren will probably also tell you that she travels more than I do because I have a full-time job. I teach down the hill, business law and negotiation, and that's true. I teach Monday through Thursday, and I travel most of the rest of the weekend. We probably have not done all that differently in terms of the mileage we've driven. We've both driven thousands of miles to talk to people all over the state, because that's part of what it means to be a candidate in the 1st District. But there is a very important difference, and it's a difference of results. I sit here today not just a candidate for the 1st District, but the only candidate to carry with him 2 critical endorsements, reflecting a specific and concrete strategy for winning the 1st District that is different from strategies that have been tried in the past. A few weeks ago, we both spoke at Washington Days, the big Democratic convention in Topeka. And at Washington Days, after hearing both of us speak, former Governor John Carlin, who many of you will remember, he was governor in the 80s, so for students, maybe you don't recall him. Some other people in the room, maybe more of that generation. John Carlin heard us both speak and came up and endorsed me on his own initiative and offered to support us because he heard what I had to say and he believed in it. Some of the things you'll hear later today about the transformation we expect to see in the 1st District. And I have also the endorsement of Mr. Beat, a much younger influencer here in Kansas, who is doing a lot of work to push specific and important government reforms. I have those endorsements because when I talk to people, something changes. They listen, they understand, and they come around. Most recently, and again, I can't think of a less confrontational way to put this, we both spoke on Saturday out in Oberlin, Kansas. And we spoke in front of an audience that has frankly heard from Lauren more than they've heard from me. One of our hosts came up to me after that event and said, I've talked to her several times. I've never talked to you before now. I hadn't made up my mind before now. You've got my vote. People hear us speak, they hear the strategy, and it changes minds. We're bringing people across the aisle, and that is critical. It's work that needs to be done, and it's work that can still be done. Mr. Beat's endorsement is open to any candidate willing to support specific and important government reforms like uncapping the House of Representatives. Lauren hasn't done it. yet. I hope she will. I hope we get that support for those initiatives across the slate of all the candidates in Kansas. But that conversation has to happen first, and it hasn't been. And that's why my efforts to preach across Kansas have been effective, productive. We've seen those endorsements, concrete results reflecting a strategy that those people can see and the results that are palpable. Thank you.
All right, well, first, thank you for acknowledging the distance we've traveled. It's a lot of work, and I give Colin kudos for doing that too. This is taking on this district. My team passed out some maps there, and so some of you might have grabbed a copy of the map and really got a chance to digest it. It's a lot. It's going to be a lot of territory, and it's going to be a lot of work. I do not have any endorsements yet. That is true. That is true. We're working on those. But I have had people come up and say that they've made up their mind, and they like me, and they like what I have to say, and they trust me. And I'm not going to list out those instances at this moment. But regarding the district, this is a deeply red and rural district. To give you some perspective, in this district, of the people registered to vote, only 20% are registered Democrat. Keep in mind, this district, Lawrence represents about 1/7 of the population. So we need to have a very careful strategy to win over the rural districts, the rural parts of this district. And here's where there's some kind of good news, bad news for all of you. I love progressive policies. I would love to advocate for universal health care, severe tax reform. My website actually does advocate for that. But I know that some of the positions will have to be incremental, particularly on healthcare and some other issues. I'm not going to go into detail of that right now, but the point I'm trying to make is if we run a candidate that's perfect for Lawrence and meets all our progressive ideals, we will lose, like we have. And so my coalition building in the primary is focused on telling people I agree with on progressive issues, that we have to be incremental in this, and we have to meet rural Kansans where they are. I've had to tell myself this, because you asked me a year ago, I'd be like, no way, we don't give on any of those issues. But the more I get out there and talk to people, I realize that we have to meet these disaffected rural voters who are registered as Republican and independent or don't vote. We need to meet them where they are and let them know that we're not expecting them to come to our way of thinking, but we're going to find the common ground. That's what this event that Colin and I were both at last weekend was called Common Ground. And that's absolutely what we need to do, is find common ground. It's going to be hard, it's going to be painful, and we're not going to be able to issue a platform that reflects the ideals of Lawrence. They drew that district to divide us. Let's not let it work. So it needs to start with us in the East being more malleable and moderating our views, and that is how we will make CD1 more winnable.
Thank you both. Additionally, something that has been on the minds of quite a few people recently, Trump's tariffs have wreaked havoc on so many industries, and we continue to pay the price. However, tariffs have especially hit our Kansas farmers. Can you explain how the tariffs have hit farmers, particularly the soybean and sorghum producers, and how would you remedy this agricultural crisis going forward? Lauren, we'll start with you.
I guess I got the wrong card. Okay, here we go. I still have to use notes. I've got a lot of public speaking to learn, and this guy right here is a very good example, because he's a great public speaker. It's making me work harder, making me strive harder. So I've talked to farmers. I've talked to a few of them. I'll talk to more. I'm sure Colin will too. And these markets were destroyed by the tariffs, and really an unstable, unpredictable tariff whiplash at a time where commodity prices were already down. That's really harmful. Worst timing ever for this. And it's making farmers feel more dependent on aid and vulnerable to market shifts. Our soy and sorghum markets, China was our biggest customer. And that market has gone away for good. China has said that they will not be buying anymore. I mean, why would they? It's not stable. So this tariff whiplash has caused our trade partners to distrust us. The solution is, again, like we've already talked about, alluded to in the first question, Congress needs to do its job. Congress needs to pick up its responsibility to negotiate trade and tariffs and insist that the president let Congress do its job and be a co-equal branch of government. And we need to pass a farm bill that will stabilize crop insurance and commodity prices and provide new markets for and reinstitute food for peace that was taken away when USAID was closed. That was not only unconscionable regarding the good that we've done in the world and is resulting in people dying in the hundreds of thousands at this point. We need to reinstitute it in the new farm bill. And this Congress, we are going to flip this Congress and flip the Senate and get a better farm bill that makes sense and utilizes our farmers for good and treats them like they should be treated. Additionally, SNAP. SNAP needs to be strengthened because it's been weakened in other legislation, strengthened in the Farm Bill. And lastly, I'd say something we need to consider is make sure that immigration reform is enacted so that farmers have the employees they need to do the work. Right now, their only legal option is seasonal part-time work, which is not seasonal work, and very cumbersome process to get H2B, well, I think it's H2B visas. And no, it is H2A, sorry. And it's really important that we reform immigration and make that easier for farmers.
So I've been teaching about tariffs for about 6 or 7 years now at the business school. I'll be honest, it is every student's least favorite part of the semester because it is a boring subject. But we make them do it because it's so important. And now I hope they were all paying attention because they'd better be following the news and seeing what's happening. We have an obligation as candidates to go out and communicate to the voters what's actually happening because they are being lied to. It begins by telling every farmer, every voter that tariffs are a tax on you. Because that is something they've been told isn't true by the Republican Party. We've got to reverse that perception. Once they understand the tariffs are the largest tax increase on the consumer in American history, they start to see the damage that it's done, and it's done a huge amount of damage. But they're also being lied to about that. For example, and I'm sorry, it's not true that China is not buying any more soybeans. China is buying a ton of soybeans pursuant to a trade agreement that was done orally instead of in writing, so nobody can track the terms of it. And the terms of it have changed a lot since it was entered. First, it was 25 million by the end of the year, and then the end of the year was always supposed to be January, and then it was going to be February, and then, hey, it's March, it's time for the end of the year, and they finally made that 25 million purchase. But that was a political purchase instead of actual businesses buying off the market for what they actually needed for the crushers, which meant it's an unstable market, one we are likely to use. We put an economic weapon into China's hand by letting them make critical purchases on their schedule instead of a free market that lets the farmers sell what they need to, when they need to be a profitable concern. And when I talk to farmers, that's what they say they want, is just to be in business, just to sell a crop and make an amount of money they can live off of. And right now, they're dependent on government checks. They're sophisticated. They understand the risk of that, which is the government checks are only available when the party that wants to please them is in power. And that's true of both Democrats and Republicans. Everybody wants the farmers to be making money, but it can change at a moment's notice when higher priorities come up and they see the weakness of that, the instability of that. They want markets. We talk to students about tariffs. One of the things we emphasize is how much confusion there is, how much difficulty, especially around instability. And that's what we've been seeing more than anything else with this tariff regime. If it was simply high tariffs, the market can adjust to that. But the way the tariffs pop up and down based on factors including, and this is not a joke, whether the premier of some country was rude to Trump on the phone, that creates economic instability that people cannot adjust to. Markets can't adjust to. So one of my outreach efforts across the district has been meeting with chambers of commerce and businesses across the state, not just to talk to farmers, but talk to all the industries that drive us. And that's what they say over and over and over again is stability, stability, stability. Well, that's what we can do. And the specific amendment she was referring to is IEPA, the International Economic Powers Act. That amendment should bring economic trade tariff powers back to Congress full-time, not just under this president, but under every president, to achieve that stability and achieve free and open markets that make it possible for farmers to make a profit. And part of that is the freedom to choose what crop they're growing. Those reforms are more USDA reforms, crop insurance reforms, because that provides more flexibility for those farmers. That's for the soybeans. For sorghum, that's really what USAID was buying. That's dependent a little bit more on what the specific emergency is they're trying to respond to. But of course, right now, they're not responding to anything because Elon Musk wanted it dead. He wanted it dead, and Tracy Mann was willing to do that job for him. I've been talking to USAID officials for months now, using personal connections to build a coalition of former USAID agents who are willing to talk to us about what Tracy Mann did to that agency. And they describe him as an enemy of food aid from the very beginning. He never wanted it, never liked it, and has been working for years to kill it at State Department, bring it over to USDA, where it would be more under political control. He still wants to do that today. He is working today to put USDA's thumb on what's left of those food aid programs because he wants to take credit for the program that he destroyed. He wants to be thought of as its savior. And I swear to God, I will not let that happen. If nothing else comes out of my campaign, Tracy Mann will for the rest of his life be known as the greatest champion of starvation this country has ever seen, because he shut down food aid programs that were feeding thousands of children. Those children died because Elon Musk fell for a conspiracy theory, and Tracy Mann did his work for him. Tracy Mann isn't stupid. Tracy Mann knew that was a lie. He just didn't care. And our job as Democrats is to make sure that every man, woman, and child in Kansas knows that, and that we are standing up for the truth and defending those food aid programs at the same time as we fight tariffs, because Kansans used to be paid for providing that food, for saving those lives. We can get back there with the right cause.
This next question is going back to you, Colin. While the war in Iran has captured much of our attention, we must not forget that ICE has rained terror on multiple communities over the past year and continues to do so. On February 27th, ICE was on KU's campus in multiple locations and detained an individual while here. The question now that we have is, what is your stance on ICE in wake of these events and what we've seen? Are you for reforming or abolishing the agency? And if so, what do you propose reform looks like?
Abolish ICE. That's the first step. If we waffle on that, we're conceding ground that should not be conceded. With specific reference to that arrest, one of my staffers, and I would name them if I had their permission, but I didn't think to ask for it before this, so I won't name them. One of my staffers messaged me that morning to say this had just happened. I found out later on that it had happened right outside my office. One of my colleagues at the business school was almost hit by the ICE vehicle as it peeled out of that lot. And immediately, everybody jumped to the assumption that this was an illegitimate arrest, that it needed to be fought. And the reason everybody made that very reasonable assumption was that ICE has done so many illegitimate arrests and so many illegal things. It is a deeply, fundamentally corrupted institution because the leadership at the top has attempted actively to corrupt it as aggressively and as thoroughly as possible. You cannot reform that. You can't just take the bad leaders out and say every individual manager, every individual agent who has been told to be violent, told to break arms, told to kick down doors, will suddenly be more responsible, will suddenly respect the people they've been given power over. No. But if we abolish ICE, when we abolish ICE, there still needs to be a law enforcement agency with some of the same remit. We will never have a country without some kind of border enforcement, just like we'll never have a country without a military, we'll never have a country without a capital. It's part of the machinery of government. And if we aren't careful about what happens next, we wind up in the same position. When we built ICE, a lot of its remit was taken from Border Patrol. Well, Border Patrol today still exists under the guidance of men like Gregory Bavino, who was so violent and so dishonest that he flirted with perjury charges in Chicago when the courts finally stood up to what they were doing on the streets of Chicago. We can't simply take the power and the budget that ICE has and drop it on Border Patrol and say, no, this is your bag, because we'll be in the same boat under some of the same people. So what we have to do in addition to abolishing ICE is take careful management of where that power and money goes next to make sure that it's done appropriately. There's 2 steps to that. The first is a civil rights audit of what ICE and Border Patrol have done over the last year. We need a public record of how many doors are broken down without a valid warrant, how many arms were broken, how many people were shot in the goddamn face by agents who knew better, were trained better, and chose worse. Because we have to make that public record so we can build a coalition, build a bipartisan agreement for reform, because without that, that reform is fundamentally unstable. Once we have that, then we can go back to something like the 2024 Immigration Compromise, which was a bill that was agreed to by Democrats and Republicans in Congress until Donald Trump decided he wanted a crisis to run on and instructed Congressional Republicans to kill it. We know we can get back there because the polling has shown the American people are deeply fed up with the mismanagement, corruption, incompetence, and frankly, evil of some of the modern border enforcement. And so by getting back to that compromise, it's not perfect, but it does a lot to restore border enforcement in a more rational way, paired with, more importantly, paths to legal residency and citizenship. We want people coming to this country. We want the best, the brightest, and just everybody to bring their life, their knowledge, their love to our shores. It makes us stronger and better. And immigration reform has to include those pathways to citizenship and residence for that purpose.
So, ICE is out of control, acting outside of its legal authority by deporting, detaining people without due process. Not to mention the violence, the human rights violations. It's so countless. I mean, so much has happened that is unacceptable, completely untenable. And ICE should only be performing certain limited statutory functions and be funded as appropriated by Congress. And once again, they've gone way outside the bounds, way outside the lanes on that. Funding and what they're doing. I used to practice immigration law. And when I did not much like ICE, because ICE was interfering with, my clients at times. And what was different then is ICE stayed in its lane. ICE followed its statutory authority. It had a legal staff that insisted it follow its statutory authority. And it only operated as appropriated by Congress. But they have a limited, as Colin pointed out, they have a legitimate function to be the law enforcement arm for the internal immigration enforcement. So, and we need ICE there to remove people who are violent offenders. But it's not a priority to remove people without due process who are not violent offenders, have not been convicted of crimes. And we know that a huge percentage of the people they've removed have been. But due process is important. And this has been, here's what I'm getting to the answer though. This has been a very tough question for me. And I'll admit, I've gone back and forth on it as I think about it. Where would ICE go? The function of ICE, that is, even if you don't call it ICE, where would that function go in the government? To the FBI? I don't think the FBI can be trusted to oversee it properly. So I think that reform is the way to go. I've talked to immigration experts and I've done a lot of reading about this, a lot of thinking about it. But that reform has to be so careful and with such a degree of oversight. That reform would look like Congress reasserting its authority, reasserting its jurisdiction to oversee agencies and investigate what they've done. As Colin mentioned, an audit of sorts, an investigation. And I'm fully in support of that, and I think that's the most important thing to start off with. And Congress, while Congress does not have power to appoint the officials the civil officers who, like Bovino, like Kristi Noem, does not have the power to impeach those folks, or does not have the power to appoint them, to effect the appointment. The Senate does, but Congress does have the power to impeach, and I think that is a very important thing that Congress needs to be doing, is identifying the leaders in ICE who committed these civil rights violations that are essentially high crimes and misdemeanors, and using its authority to impeach as part of investigation. And additionally, Congress needs to, and I would support as a member of Congress and demand justice for ICE officers who broke the law. Justice being, if they broke the law, if they committed those violations, they need to be prosecuted with no barriers. This has become entirely corrupt. ICE has, but it needs very, very careful reform, and I don't know where else it would go.
All right. So, final question for me today, and then we get to move on to your all's questions, which I'm very much more looking forward to. How has Tracy Mann failed us in higher education? If you were in Congress, how would you support higher education in Kansas? We're going to start with you.
Okay. So, I've done some research on this issue, and he hasn't done much. He hasn't done much of anything, whether it's higher education or anything. He's lies pretty low. Does as little as possible, just letting Trump do what he wants. But as a typical social conservative, he clearly hates higher education and stood by while Doge was axed DEI, and Trump punished universities for freedom of speech and took away grants. Completely unacceptable. But a lot of the higher education oversight and funding issues are state issues. You know, here for the state universities, that's usually the purview of the state. But what Congress could do is reinstitute DEI, resume enforcement of civil rights violations in the Department of Education. Those functions have been gutted. And absolutely, the Department of Education needs to be rebuilt, like so many other federal agencies, and Congress needs to demand it. Congress can also protect federal educational grants from the whims of the president, of any president. We don't want that. We don't want those willy-nilly use of power, contrary to how Congress appropriated. And Congress can protect educators and institutions in their freedom of speech. Educators like Colin, like other educators we might have in the room here, should be able to choose their curriculum and teach the curriculum that's right for them, use pronouns that they want to use. This hamstringing freedom of speech of our higher ed professionals it's a slippery slope, as you all know. A slippery slope to fascism. Also, Congress, so a real important issue for students is the cost of education. I don't see the state fixing that anytime soon. If we elect Democratic leadership in the state, we have a chance to get some of that fixed and get higher ed funded here in our state. But I support programs that would forgive and reduce student loans, and I support legislation that makes higher education affordable in any way. My daughter is 18, a senior in high school, and starting college here at KU in the fall, and I'm really frightened for her and the affordability, and if she's going to have loans. She's probably going to have loans at this point, and there's no affordable option. So those are some of the things that Congress could do, even though a lot of this purviews the state.
I want to start with an uncomfortable preface, which is I have to give Tracy Mann credit for something. And it's important to be honest about that, because otherwise we throw out the good with the bad. One thing that he's done in the field of higher education that I appreciate and would continue myself is that he's worked to take some of the authority that the federal government has over Haskell Indian Nations University and give it back to the First Nations. That's a desirable thing. That's worth doing. And that's it. We can stop right there and show what Tracy Mann has done for the government. I'm a little bit surprised to hear that there's not much that Congress has to do with higher education, because being in it myself, we see federal law involved every single day. And there's two primary ways that Congress needs to step up on an almost emergency basis. The first, and she touched on this a little bit, is the availability of research funding. Research funding was destroyed by vandalism, by people who did not know what they were doing, and more importantly, did not care. And what they killed were things that were vital to everyday Kansans, whether or not they've got kids at KU. I have a colleague here at the university I met as a bargainer for the faculty union, UAKU, and this person told me, and again, I can't use their name, they don't have permission for that, but they told me that their work is the kind of thing that could one day lead to something that could one day lead to a vaccine for Alzheimer's disease. I think that's something we'd like to have. Dead. Dead because the grant applications referred to the diversity of the patient population, and diversity is the enemy now. That is vandalism, and people don't know that it's happening. Our responsibility as candidates is to go to people across the district, especially those that don't agree with us, especially those that aren't in our media bubble, and tell them it's happening. Tell them why it matters. Tell them that medication, cancer trials, clinical trials, farming grants, Feed the Future grants at K-State that paid to fund research, perennial wheat and dryland crops, things like that have been destroyed by vandalism, and our job is to not just fight it in Congress, but to fight it as candidates. So even if we don't win the race, we've done some good and moved that ball forwards. But we have to know about it and be passionate about it and be inspiring about it to make that difference. That's also true of the humanities. It's not just the hard sciences. That's the easiest thing to explain to somebody why it matters, because it may save their life. But the humanities are also important because that is life. That's what we do as a people. The art and the music and the dance and the culture we create and we appreciate. Universities are a part of that. And that has also been destroyed by the destruction of funding, but also just the hostility to knowledge. When the vice president defines professors as the enemy class, defines empathy as the enemy, that is fundamentally attacking who we are as a liberal society, and we have to be prepared, and we have to go out every single day as candidates and fight that. Fight for the things that matter to us. The other policy thing we can do is coming back to immigration. I had a student in the first Trump administration, and well, I gotta be honest, I can't remember his name, but I wouldn't use it anyway because I don't have permission. He was a Kazakh immigrant on a student visa, stopped coming to class halfway through the semester because he was afraid, because his visa had been canceled suddenly with no explanation, and he didn't know what to do about that. And he was afraid that if he left his apartment, he'd be snatched and deported. Now, a lot of the time when a student tells me they can't come to class, I'm a little skeptical of the reason why. But this student was a fantastic student and just disappeared halfway through the semester. And it breaks my heart. I had an MBA student last year who finally got his immigration paperwork approved, and that guy's goal, his dream, and now his job is preservation architecture here in the state of Kansas. He will spend the next few years of his life and probably his entire career protecting and defending and restoring our history in stone and brick and mortar, because he brought that skill and that passion to us. But it's at risk because of this hatred and hostility to immigration. And this ties in also even to the affordability of college education, because those students who come from overseas are not just bringing their passion and their intelligence and their history, they're paying full freight. And that subsidizes students who came from Kansas. One of the reasons college education has gotten more expensive is we can no longer export the education we used to export to the entire planet, both because we have made an affirmative decision in DC not to do that, but also because the incompetence, the chaos, and the hate coming out of DC scares people. And the kind of student who can come to KU could just as easily go to London, could just as easily go to Paris, and they choose that instead of Kansas once we make this an unwelcoming place. And that is never what Kansas should be. Hospitality means something to us. It's not just morally good, it also, again, subsidizes our educational system. We need to return to not just a normal business sense for our universities, but also get our heart back, care about the things that matter to us. They're one and the same, and we have to go out and sell that message, show people why it matters all across Kansas. We're the ambassadors for that system, and it's our job to do that. I'm very pleased and proud to have been able to do it with you here today.
Thank you both, and thank you all for bearing with me. We now get to move on to what I would like to say is my favorite part of this event, where both of our candidates, Colin and Lauren, get to hear from you. So with that said, please allow me to introduce our wonderful co-PR chair, Kenny.
I didn't know I was reading these questions until just now. So, for our first question, we'll start with, which one of you did we start with last time?
Start with me, so
We'll start with Colin. It's Twister season, and one just got Ottawa. If you go to Congress, how would you make the case for preventative warning systems to the teleporting FEMA director?
So I was posting about this last night, and if you're not familiar with the story, the FEMA director, I'm sure, is a lovely gentleman who occasionally regains consciousness in a Waffle House. And listen, there's some students in the room. Raise your hand if you've never regained consciousness in a Waffle House. It happens from time to time, but most people can understand why that happened. He believes that supernatural powers have teleported him to that Waffle House. And I teach a class every other semester on conspiracy theories. I read a lot. I talk to a lot of people with very unusual beliefs as part of my work as an academic. That's fine. Somebody can be a wonderful, lovely, productive human being and still believe in Bigfoot, alien abductions. That's not a problem. But they shouldn't be in charge of FEMA if they can't connect those dots rationally. That is too important a job, and it's an indication of how much the federal government has rotted out. That we can look at someone with that critical a position and say, it's fine that you believe aliens are teleporting you to the Waffle House. It's not fine. It's a critical problem, but it's not the only problem. Those services have been hollowed out by job cuts. Lauren lost her position to one of those cuts, and it's done a lot to take away the talented professionals we need in the federal government and degrade the quality of services. And again, farmers across the district understand this extremely well. They are very closely tied to the weather. They know exactly how important those predictive services are. People who have lost a home to a tornado understand it extremely well. But a lot of the district does not understand how much we've lost in terms of that predictive ability, in terms of the early warning systems. And so again, our first step as candidates is to communicate that to people, to show them it matters, to inspire them that we can do something better than this. But then separately, we have to do, again, that careful work of auditing what FEMA has done, the loss of services, where those services have been steered according to political metrics instead of actual need, which is a power the president has. We need to make sure there's a record of it so we can hold it up and say, this never happens again. We never have a state denied emergency coverage because who had voted for in the last election. We're restoring that sense of shame, restoring that sense of integrity on top of the personnel. We'll do as much as we can do in the next 2 years to restore the strength of that legal system.
So this is a perfect example of how I've been saying we are going to feel the effects of Doge cuts for months, years. The effects, the adverse effects are going to roll out. And if there's not funding to get warning systems in place, now I don't know about equipment, if there is a federal pipeline for warning equipment, but I do know the National Weather Service had significant cuts and suffered a lot of the same that all other agencies did with people leaving. And when people left and took the buyouts or retired early because they saw the writing on the wall and saw this was going to be a terrible place to work, it was the most experienced and talented, and I'm very concerned that our weather prediction, our weather warnings are not going to be adequate. And there have been a few examples of that already where warning systems have not happened at the pace they need to. As for FEMA, in the disaster realm, I mean, once again, we are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. If we have a major we will, especially with this climate change, have a major natural disaster or have, be it flooding, be it severe tornadoes, be it heat. FEMA is not in good shape to handle that. I'm sure of it. Without even knowing the details, I'm sure that those cuts and this, once again, that whiplash that we've heard from federal leadership, I hesitate to even call it leadership, the people who've been appointed to these agencies. They're not acting like great leaders, that's for darn sure. To see them say back and forth, oh, we're gonna just get rid of FEMA, leave it to the states. Really? How is, So, with permission from this president, permission from Doge, we've had irresponsible actions in our agencies, be it NWS, be it FEMA. And as for agency heads who have delusions, like our teleporting guy, there's, once again, impeachment. Impeachment needs to occur. Clearly that person is not mentally well and incompetent and needs to be removed. And this Congress, as they stand, the Republicans are just letting it happen. But we're gonna flip the House and we're gonna flip the Senate and get government back working for the people.
Thank you both. Our next question. Right now in Jefferson County, we've lost almost every grocery store. Small farms are struggling. We drive 30 minutes to buy food often grown or raised nearby, but processed somewhere else. What is one specific policy you would push that would bring local food back to local shelves, and how would you make it happen in a place like ours?
Oh, wow. And I've driven by that empty grocery store in Perry many times. I remember it used to be there when my former in-laws lived up by the lake and was busy, always busy. And there's been so many communities who've suffered and had to drive further, don't have the access to groceries. I think ultimately there needs to be a local food initiative within the Farm Bill. That's probably the best place for it. But in the interim, we need to restore SNAP so this doesn't happen to more communities. The SNAP cuts seen under the big ugly bill are predicted to close many small town and rural grocery stores. And we don't want to see that happen to more communities because the communities out in the west of this state, they have to drive even further to get to the nearest city. At least in Jefferson County, you've got a Dillon's in Lawrence, you've got a Dillon's in Topeka, and you're probably not driving more than 30 or 45 minutes, but that's still not acceptable, but the distances are going to be even worse for people in the rural counties. So you asked me one thing and I said two, so fix the SNAP benefits, restore those SNAP benefits because grocery stores rely on them, and put a local food initiative into the Farm Bill so that we can more environmentally and more healthfully produce food and use it locally.
So there are already a number of local food initiatives in the existing Farm Bill. They're not strong enough. And one specific improvement we could do is to provide startup funding and other additional startup assistance to co-ops. I was working with the Farmers Union a while back, and they had a fantastic rural initiative here in Lawrence where they just brought in a lot of experts from all over the state. And one of the most useful pieces of that little conference was teaching people how co-ops work, how to begin their own co-ops, the value of that. They brought in some fantastic national speakers to bolster that effort. And it kept occurring to me as we were listening to these people explain how to begin your own co-op, what the benefits are, how it works financially, how it works economically, politically. This should have been explained a long time ago through the USDA. One of the things we can do with more competent personnel in the USDA, instead of reducing the number of competent people, is provide that kind of assistance, whether it's in terms of financial grants or just in terms of expertise. Someone to be in the community and explain, this is the value of a co-op, this is how you set it up, this is how it gets food onto the shelves, this is what it does for the customer, this is how they join it. There are some other things that go into that, like making sure co-ops are transparent to their members about what exactly the assets are. It's a little more technical, I won't get into it now. But I want to agree with something she said, which was the fixing of the SNAP program. And in particular, I've got to be honest, I don't know how popular this initiative would be in this particular room, but I think so. I want to see SNAP have fewer restrictions on what people can buy when they're on SNAP. As Democrats, we have a long history of saying people should eat this, shouldn't eat that, and I think we've seen under RFK that can go real bad, real fast. No, it doesn't work. One of the ways we assist local grocers is we reduce the number of overhead requirements they have for policing what people are buying with SNAP benefits. If somebody wants to buy a candy bar after a long day working their 2 jobs because they don't have time to go make a healthy meal, let them buy a damn candy bar. That is not going to hurt anybody, and it helps the grocer by making sure they're not the food cops anymore. So not just fixing the provision of SNAP benefits, as she said, but also making sure those benefits are done more efficiently and in a way that's designed to help the grocer instead of helping RFK, which should be nobody's objective.
Thank you both. You are both attorneys coming from Lawrence, Kansas. What have Democrats consistently gotten wrong about rural Kansans? And what will you do differently so rural Kansans will trust you?
So, the last candidate for this district, Paul Buskirk, is a friend of mine, a guy I knew and liked before he ever ran for office. And he worked hard to win the district over. He moved over to the western side of the district and basically lived out there for months because he was able to make his job remote. And he worked like a dog and lost by 40 points. The thing that's holding us back as Democrats in the first district isn't really anything Democrats have done. It's that partisanship. It's the barrier that stands between Democrat and Republican because we've got 50, 60, 80, 100 years now of Republicans saying Democrats are the enemy. You would never vote for a Democrat. Why would you vote for a Democrat? We see it on social media. Somebody posts something on Twitter and it's 50 people beneath it saying, vote Republican. I had a guy on my Facebook page of the day say, vote Republican to save America. Buddy, from who? The Republican president? The Republican Congress? The Republican State House? It's just that knee-jerk reflexive partisanship. And it's gotten so bad that I've talked to some of my supporters out in Abilene, and they say that they can't get people to come to the local Dem meeting because they're worried they'll lose customers at their business. They're worried about being boycotted if their neighbors find out they're Democrats. What we do is we change the perspective on what a Democrat is. We go out and talk to them, and we don't just say, we're Democrats, Tracy Mann is a bad guy, because Tracy Mann is a Republican, and they'll vote for the party if they don't vote for the person. We convince them the person is there to do something fundamentally different. For me, that's coming out of that business background. As I've toured the state, I've talked to businesses, chambers of commerce, talked to them and said, what is the congressional delegation doing for you? How is it working? And what I hear from Republicans and Democrats is, you know who's great? Jerry Moran. Hard stop. Even Democrats will say good things about Jerry Moran because while they hate his politics, they respect the fact that he shows up and does the job of a congressperson. Nobody, not even Republicans, will say a good word about Tracy Mann because he doesn't show up. He doesn't do that job. We can hold his feet to the fire individually, personally, tie him to things like the destruction of USAID, but we have to also hold ourselves out as somebody who is different. And part of that is inspiration. Part of it is we show up in a room and we speak and we start a fire in somebody's heart. It's not enough to say that we're different. It's not enough to say that things aren't going well. It's not enough to say that we would do things better. We have to make sure they believe us and they see us differently. And they see us as a person they could vote for and be comfortable with and confident in because we have to be aware we may not win this election. We've seen races all over the country flip by a big enough margin to make the first district competitive, but that is not a guarantee. The blue wave will not save us. It is a call to work and a call to transform. And if we do not win this race, we will leave behind a stronger and more competitive district as long as we persuade, as long as we inspire. That's our job. That's our work as candidates. That's what I'm here to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Colin and I have picked like one of the most difficult things to do, threading this needle and getting rural Kansans to align with Democrats. It's going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult. And as a lawyer coming from Lawrence, I know it makes it even harder for me, even more difficult to be trusted. But it's going to be a matter of having a lot of difficult conversations, being willing to go into rooms with hostile audiences and be argued with and be called names. And ultimately, it has to be done, though, those difficult conversations and finding what our common ground is. And like I said earlier, it starts with helping you all understand here on the eastern side of the state that we can't run far left. We will turn off those people. It will make it even harder. But to really find the commonalities, the issues that are affecting all of us the same. Living wage, healthcare, immigration to some extent. Immigration is a mixed issue, obviously in rural areas, but there's a lot of people who are unhappy about what ICE is doing, even in rural areas. So, and then I think the other really important thing to do is to point out all the things that Tracy Mann has done, either by letting this president do whatever they want or voting on legislation that's harmful, and point that out in a very factual way. As Colin pointed out, he's not popular. He's kind of just default right now. They're default Republican. And to really drive home with those difficult audiences that are going to come with really adverse views to the Democratic Party's platform, to drive home to them the things that Mann's actions, or more like, in many cases, inaction, have done to hurt them and hurt their bottom line. The tariffs, the healthcare prices, reducing USDA functions. Staffing is at an all-time low in the USDA offices statewide, which has really hurt farmers. And on and on. There's many other things. But it's a needle to thread, and it's going to mean a lot of difficult conversations and uncomfortable conversations, and I'm here for it.
So we are through our formal open floor question part of the night. However, we do have some snacks and drinks in the back if you'd like to get yourselves cozy, and then if you have any further questions for our candidates here, I'm sure they would love to hear from you. For about the next 45 minutes until this event concludes at 8, you are welcome to meet and mingle with the candidates and speak with them one-on-one. If you have a question for them, you are welcome to ask it there, and you can speak with them one-on-one if you'd like. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. This has been a wonderful event. Feel free to stay as long as you'd like. And we hope you'll join us again this Thursday as we welcome Senators Egan Corson and Cindy Holscher for a gubernatorial Meet the Candidates forum. Same place, same time. Thank you very much.